Well, it could be morning, it could be afternoon, it could be evening where you are, but hello, wherever you are, and welcome actually to another one of our podcast episodes. This is the hearUSout podcast by Urban Saints, and what we do is this is a podcast that exists for youth workers where we discuss a vast range of issues pertaining to youth work, all things youth work, to make sure that we can equip our viewers and youth workers and just to, share some perspectives and to deliberate over things. My name is Nesu, and I'm the Youth Engagement and Content Coordinator at Urban Saints. I'm joined by my co-host, Paris, who's the Digital Outreach Coordinator and also the brains behind a lot of the digital stuff that happens at Urban Saints, as well as this podcast. So it's an honor once again to be alongside her. Today, you have no idea. I'm so pumped. I've been saying this to this guest before we even got here. I was just like, I'm so pumped. We've got Sarah Davison from Scripture Union, with us today to discuss a whole host of things. But hey, I'm going to let her introduce herself. But she's a friend of Urban Saints most recently. I met her at a research community event, and heard a lot of what she had to say, and was just like, you know what, we need to be friends. We need to be friends. She's awesome. So Sarah, welcome to the pod. Would you like to tell us, for the benefit of our viewers, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. I'm Sarah Davison. I am the Research and Innovation Lead at Scripture Union. I've worked with Scripture Union for about 8 years, coming on 9 years now. I'm passionate about seeing children and young people develop their own relationship with Jesus. I'm based up near Runcorn, so in the northwest. I'm married. I've got a lovely husband called Andy, and we've got a little boy called Eli. And we've recently moved out into the sticks, into the countryside. So it's been a bit of a shift from Stockport to countryside. So, but excited to chat today and share more.
Yeah, well, awesome. Thank you so much for having us. And we're definitely going to delve into what you're about and what you do a bit deeper later on. But before we get into that, we're going to have our show us segments. This is kind of like show and tell. Previously, Nesu has shared his infamous jam that he's been loving. In the last episode, I shared my Lego flowers that I completed with my husband one evening. But to kick us off, as you're our special guest, Sarah, would you like to show us something that you've been loving, been finding interesting? What have you got for us today?
Well, it seems to follow on from the Lego theme. I've got a little Lego Yoda.
Oh, cute.
My 7-year-old is full on into Star Wars era at the minute. And he, bless him, has been saving up his pennies for a while now and recently obtained some new Star Wars Lego that he has been saving up for. So we've had a bit of a weekend of Star Wars Lego building, which has been fun. So we've been building some TIE fighters and an X-Wing. We've been really enjoying that. And even just as a family, kind of delving into that. He loves the Lego Star Wars games on his Nintendo Switch. He loves the films. He's just started watching them with my husband. Tentatively, he's only 7, so we've kind of gone with the older ones first. They feel a bit more appropriate. But just loving seeing him discover the Star Wars universe. And himself actually makes some really interesting comparisons with what he's understanding about Jesus and about some of the themes and intertwining and that. So it's been really interesting just exploring that. So Yoda and all his wisdom is my
love that. Well, welcome good. Yoda, who's joining us on the episode as well. All right, Nessie, what are you bringing to the table? Let's see.
Right, what am I bringing to the table? Okay, and bam. Yeah, okay, you don't know what this is. I'm going to have to explain. Basically, so a couple of months ago, I was just like, you know what? We read the Bible in English, right? Because, we're an English-speaking country and a lot of the world is English. But I think I just remembered, I was like, oh, snap, do you know what? I come from Zimbabwe. I speak a language from there, Shona. And I was like, what would it be like? Because I realized, even in Jesus's times, they wouldn't have been reading in English. They would have been reading in the local language, in the New Testament, Greek, and all that kind of stuff. So it would have been really interesting to get the Bible in my own language. And recently I got my mom, I was like, Mom, can you try and find a Zimbabwean Shona Bible for me? And I've really been enjoying it. It's so funny just to think of the phrases, because with language, you can't translate certain things directly. You know, you have to kind of come. So it's just so interesting to see it in your local language. So that's mine. It's called Bibery, which means Bible. And yeah, I've just been enjoying that. That's been, yeah, really interesting for me.
Love that. That's a good one. Okay, well, mine is I don't know if anyone's been seeing the kind of viral adult coloring books. So that's been my activity for the past week while I've been on annual leave. And I just want to show
Nice.
you guys the coloring that I've been getting up to.
Nice.
You rate my
That is good.
skills.
I actually do rate that.
So, yeah, it's very relaxing. Like I'm creative anyway, but it's nice to kind of do something else and just get away from your phone and from scrolling. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's mine. But good items, guys. I'm really happy with that. We've got Yoda, got Bible, and we've got colouring. Yeah, so thank you for sharing those with us. But let's move on to the main meat of the episode. So we've got Sarah with us, and you know, she's passionate about what she does and helping young people. And we kind of just want to talk about what it's like to walk with people and where are we walking with young people, whether it's in the physical, in our communities, or in online spaces. We want to delve into that a bit deeper. And so the first question we're going to go into is, where do young people live today? So Nessie, do you want to kickstart us off and then we'll go to Sarah. Where do young people live today in both physical and online spaces?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think in recent years, right? So we are all, I suppose, at the tail end in some respects of what I would say is the technological revolution in a sense. You know, a couple of years back or a few decades back, we didn't have as much tech around us, you know what I mean? And so the physical world was probably the primary domain in which we lived, had our communities and all that kind of stuff. But in recent years, as most of us will know and be aware of, the online space has emerged as a world in its own right. You know what I mean? Insofar as the Bible says, go ye into all the world, you know what I mean? It may have been physical, but now there's a whole, you know, online platform space world that we need to actually consider when we're talking about where do we live and where do we walk with young people, because this podcast is about walking with youth workers and then them walking with young people. But, you know, the places where we live as a society has really changed. So that's my perspective. And obviously, there's a whole plethora of stuff that happens that straddles both worlds: climate issues, religious and political issues, but they all happen in that space. But Sarah, you have a lot more to say and a lot more experience and wisdom to shine on this matter. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the both and of spaces, isn't it? Like you're saying, it's the physical, it's the digital. And I think for young people, it's not really that they don't really have the same distinction as maybe we would. Like they've grown up with both of those spaces coexisting from the start. And I think when you think about even their education happens in both physical and digital spaces, whether that's in the classroom, they're engaging in learning online whilst in the classroom together, whether that's homework is online, as well as physical. You know, I think all of their spaces, whether it's relationship building, entertainment, like I said, learning, all of it happens in the both and I think they're constantly living in that hybrid space of online and digital, and have grown up kind of navigating those two spaces as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think for us, when like if you kind of think back in the day when we would think of youth and where are youth need more, we would say a lot more youth centres to go to after school, so they're not just on the streets. But I think that kind of narrative has changed a lot now. It's not just where are all the youth centres, but it's how can we engage youth at home from their bedrooms. So it's just enter into a lot of new spaces. And I think us as kind of adults, you know, kind of changing our perspectives about where young people should be and what they should be doing with their time, as a lot of new things are being introduced. So yeah, I definitely think that's something to consider as well. But more on what you said, Nesu, about like the politics and the climate that we're in, how do you think that kind of plays into how we as youth workers or volunteers kind of catch up to where the young people are and to how they're viewing the world? What do you think on that?
I think there's just so many spaces for input now, isn't there, as well? I think actually the breadth and depth of information that children and young people are able to access about so much of that stuff, and the views and the ideologies and the interpretations and the thinking, they're kind of bombarded with so much of it. And I think that can be really helpful, because actually they're getting an insight into a really broad sense and scope of different ideas and thinking. But also, I think if they don't necessarily have the understanding to how to filter that and how to kind of consume that type of information, it can potentially be quite challenging as well. Well, where are your thoughts in all of that space, and how do you kind of cultivate your own thinking? And actually, I think as youth leaders and youth workers, how do we then position ourselves to really journey with them to help filter some of that stuff, and actually to help them understand and decipher, I guess, what do I do with all of this information, and how do I then cultivate my own perspectives and opinions in the midst of that? And actually, well, where does God sit in that as well? And what are the biblical perspectives and views that play into that, and how do I weight and measure that, and all of that kind of stuff? So I wonder whether, I don't know if it's necessarily a case of us as youth workers and youth leaders kind of catching up. I don't know that we necessarily will, because we're not kind of perceiving the world in the same way that they are at that age. But I think actually for us, it's about how do we steward that responsibility of really journeying with children and young people in that space, and helping equip them to actually respond and have kind of, build resilience in that space, kind of constructive kind of criticism. How do they weigh up what they're hearing, and what filters do they put that through? How do they know when something's helpful or harmful? And I think we really get to be the ones that help bring that balance and help journey through that with them, perhaps. Agreed.
I think that's kind of like another element of discipleship, isn't it? Not necessarily in the spiritual sense, but in helping them to have discernment and wise teaching, that can apply to various different areas, whether it's online, whether it's kind of situational, whether it's school. So that element of discipleship, I agree. What were you going to say, Nessie?
No, I thought you said Nessie at the end of the call. I was like, no, I think Sarah has a lot more insight on this. I was like, that's interesting. Yeah, no, sorry, I misheard. But no. Actually, what I was going to say is Sarah's just written an amazing article and piece on Premier Next Gen. So we're going to flag that up so you guys can see and have a look. But that has a lot to say about the kind of navigating that and how we can kind of posture ourselves, because as you say, Sarah, there's a sense in which I don't know if we'll be able to keep abreast with how they're navigating this space, but there are ways we can posture ourselves to be able to receive the most we can from those experiences, to walk with them and stuff like that. So we'll flag that up. I think I recommend all youth workers, if you're listening to this, please have a look on that to that article. It's really informative and helpful. That's a smart.
So also looking at then, what are the prevailing perspectives about the online world? We've kind of discussed how for young people, there's not that kind of hard divide, because, they've grown up with it, it's all they know. So I guess, what do young people think about online spaces from research that you've done? What's kind of being revealed to you about how they think about it?
So we, at Scripture Union, we recently partnered with Liverpool Hope University to do a research piece exploring kind of mission in hybrid spaces, so the both and actually what do children and young people think about that, what are their thoughts and perspectives. We spoke to a lot of children and young people that were from non-church backgrounds as well as those that were, just to get a real kind of breadth really of thinking and perspectives in that. And what we kind of found was that actually children and young people, their preference especially for exploring faith and spirituality, but also in a number of different areas, was that they wanted to engage in an online and offline way. So actually they wanted the both and that was something that was significant and valuable and important to them. And they were able to articulate that was because actually each space kind of served a different purpose. So for them, they saw the online space as being something that was accessible at any given time. There was flexibility in the way that they engaged with it. There was also, it was a space that actually they could kind of ask the questions that they want answered. They could kind of bring their own individual kind of thoughts to that space and go after that. But it was also a space that they would go to for facts and figures and information. Whereas when they wanted to explore more about experiential faith, like what does it really mean to kind of live a life of prayer, or what does it really mean to kind of be a friend of Jesus? Like, how does that really play out? They really wanted to connect with a real person that they knew, that they trusted, and they really valued this face-to-face spaces for that. So they themselves see the online world and the face-to-face world as serving different purposes, but they value the both and they want both of those spaces. But it was also interesting because in our research, we spoke to youth workers, children's workers, and asked them kind of, if you were thinking about the children and young people you work with, what impact and influence do you think the online spaces have on them? And we asked the children and young people the same questions. And actually what came back were two very different answers. So the youth and children's workers, their thoughts and perspectives were kind of the polar opposite to our children and young people. So, for example, we asked them what, essentially we were talking about what impact do you think kind of influencers and social media has? How does that influence children and young people? And the youth workers and children's workers said, well, we see that influences and impacts them loads. We see a massive impact on them based on social media. Whereas our children and our young people, they said, it actually doesn't really influence us that much. Like, we don't really see it as having that much of an influence. And it was the same across the board, across kind of friendships, across kind of the way that they engage as well. And there was loads of different areas. And again, in every single case, it was a polar opposite. And I think there's loads of reasons why that could be. Perhaps actually our children and young people don't fully know how they're being impacted or influenced. Maybe they don't have a full grasp on it. But equally, maybe as children's workers, youth workers, maybe we don't fully understand the context either. And actually, for me, it really highlighted that I think there is quite a difference in perspective that our children and young people have about the online and the face-to-face, and then what we potentially as an older generation of youth workers, our perspectives and thoughts on it. So for me, it just really highlighted the need for conversation, how are we really opening up these conversations really intentionally, rather than making assumptions that, well, we think it's doing this, so let's act accordingly, when actually, do we really know, like, what are the young people in front of us, what are they really experiencing in the online world, and how can we really meet them where they're at, rather than assuming we know. So yeah, and obviously, as with any data set, there's lots of complexities and limiting factors and all of that kind of thing, but I think it's definitely an interesting thing to kind of explore a bit deeper. Actually, if there was such a juxtaposition in their opinions, how do we level it out a little bit? Where do we find balance in that?
Yeah, because as well, like when we're breaking down those assumptions, it just helps us to be more effective across the board. So yeah, I do think having a space for those conversations, young people, youth workers, it's going to help us get a lot of clarity moving forward, because the digital space isn't going anywhere. So, we want to, like you said, not even catch up, but just have a better understanding so we can use it as a tool the best way we can. Yeah, Nessie, what do you want to say? What have you got?
You know what? I kind of want to pick Sarah's brains a little bit, because you know what? I was reading something in the news the other day, and it's okay. So the minister for digital media in France, called Clara Chapas, had basically notified the EU regulators that there was a trend on TikTok called skinny talk, and she was worried that this skinny talk phenomena, or whatever was going on, was basically encouraging young women and girls towards extreme thinness. You know what I mean? And she was highlighting that it was a public health issue. You know what I mean? And that's I read this and I thought, wow, this was like the news headline, and this was the content of the article. What do you think, Sarah, is the impact of mainstream media that a lot of adults or youth workers or a lot of us read around media? What do you think the impact is on the way we see the online space as it relates to young people and their development? What do you think that is?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing at the minute is there's a lot of fear-based media around what's going on in the online world. And I think some of that is clearly founded, right? Like we know that it's a space where there are potential harms in that space. But I also think that actually it's like with most things that are unknown, often our first response is that of a fear response, right? Like if we don't know it, we're not really sure. And I think as with any kind of youth work and children's work, there's always risk involved, isn't there? And I think any kind of space, whether that's a football field or whether that's an online space, there are challenges and there are risks there. And I think for us, for me, I see our responsibility as youth workers is to firstly learn, like how do we familiarize ourselves with that space rather than necessarily just taking a fear response. Like I said, I'm not saying that there aren't things there that we need to be aware of and we need to safeguard our young people against, and that there aren't elements that can be harmful. But I think until we fully understand the both and, again, what are the opportunities there? What's God already doing in that space as well? And how actually can we be partnering with where he's moving in that space? And how can we be intentional about making any interactions that we do have as safe as possible, as we would with any youth or children's work? You know, how are we safeguarding? Like, how are our policies supporting what we're doing? How are we being really mindful of that? But I think my response to that would be let's hear what Holy Spirit's saying, right? Like actually, rather than just our first response being one of fear, let's hold that, but let's learn and let's figure out what else is going on and where maybe is God already moving and how can we partner with that, rather than just kind of taking a stance of, oh, it's dangerous, let's just not go there. Because I also don't think that's an option, because so many children and young people are in that space, right? And again, that call to go to where they are, it's a place that they are. So how are we doing that? I don't think we can just ignore it.
Absolutely. I think as well, when Nessa and I did a digital outreach webinar back in February, and, you know, we see that there's a willingness for people to learn how to navigate these spaces. And something that we shared was actually how young people are actually already engaging with faith on those platforms. So, for example, in that webinar, we gave a couple examples of faith-based content creators, online gaming communities. So, yeah, like definitely God is already moving in the online spaces and using young people to, you know, be at the front lines of that. So I think the more open we are and the more willing we are to learn and explore and just to get familiar, like we were saying, even if it's just one new platform you're getting familiar with, how are young people using it? How can I maybe use it? I think that's just that first step. So yeah, definitely, I agree.
Yeah, Paris, I'm so glad that you kind of just mentioned that, you know, people there are things that are spiritual impacts are being had because of some of this, you know, online content that's out there. I remember I was speaking to a young person. We were speaking as a sort of youth group leadership sometime back, to a young person who had come to faith reading the KJV on TikTok. You know, I mean, those are the most unlikely two things together. You know, this is a young person, and that's, you know, a difficult text to kind of read, but these things, they work. And so, Sarah, I think you're so right in terms of not being apprehensive and just being absolutely plagued by fear. We don't understand, because a lot of the times we're scared because we fear that we can't navigate the space. You're overwhelmed because we don't have the dexterity to be able to navigate a platform. And so we just think, oh no, we don't understand it, so it must be bad, kind of thing. But we have to lean into some of these things. But I mean, even on this topic, I'm just thinking, so they're living in these, you know, so not parallel, but I mean, they coexist. Let's say that they coexist, physical and the online space, in the midst of all the other stuff that's going on in both worlds. How do we, I mean, our final kind of consideration and question is really the crux of youth work. How do we walk with young people in their worlds today, both the physical and the digital worlds? How do we do that? I'd love to hear from you, Sarah, and then Paris, you can let us know as well.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, like you said, Nessie, like it's the crux, isn't it, of what we do anyway. I think for me, the first thing is get to know our children and young people. Like actually, we need to know and understand those that are in front of us, and I think that's the first port of call. Whether that's they're in a digital space or a physical space, or they're in both and, or I think as we really intentionally build relationship with the young people we're journeying with, then I think it's about caring about what they care about. It's about kind of learning, getting excited about what they're excited about. It's about helping them navigate the risks and the challenges and the things that they're facing, whether that's in an online space or at school as well, or, you know. So I think for me that it feels like, oh, it's a whole other ball game, the online world and doing youth work in the online world. And I understand that to a degree, yes, there are a lot of differences, but ultimately the crux of it for me remains the same. And I also think that in order to walk with young people in the worlds that they're in today, like we don't have to be an expert at them either. Like we don't have to try and, if they're really into gaming, like we don't need to be streaming on Twitch 3 nights a week to kind of relationally connect with them in something they're excited and interested about. And I think it's just taking the time to care and invest and upskill ourselves perhaps, and intentionally go, oh, that young person mentioned, I don't know, Minecraft or Fortnite or whatever it was that they mentioned. You know what? I don't really know much about that, so I'm going to go and look into it and read up on it. And then next time you see them, you go, oh, I was learning this. Like, what's that about? And I think it's the same with anything, isn't it? It's actually how are we showing them that we care? How are we building relationship based on who they are? And also then how are we sharing kind of Jesus in those moments? Like actually there's so many ways that we can share more about who God is, and also at the pace that they're at, you know. Again, let's journey with them where they are, and let's go kind of, let's follow their lead as well, but create those opportunities for them to explore more about faith, to respond, you know, to grow in faith. So yeah, I think it's there kind of isn't a newfound way of doing it. I don't think. I think it's the old stuff, right? It's the relational, it's the integrity, it's the caring. But maybe we just need to upskill ourselves a little bit in our knowledge of how to do that if it's based around something that we don't know much about. But yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, even going back to what you said about just like building relationships, we don't necessarily need to come at it at a perspective of, you know, I need to join this online platform to tell children about Jesus. Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be like that. Like, find a way that you can connect, like whether it's through a hobby, a shared interest. We're all into different things, not necessarily just gaming. There's so many things out there in different niches and pockets of the internet where people are exploring their interests and, you know, building communities. So even if you're thinking of coming at it from that angle of just a shared interest that you can build upon, learning and being inspired by how a certain online community could do something, and then implement those same strategies when you're thinking about discipleship, when you're thinking about how to share Jesus. So there's so many areas where we can be inspired and just grab little things that can be useful and apply it to what we're doing. So yeah, there's so much room to explore and be creative with it as well.
Absolutely. I think, Paris, what you're both saying, okay, fundamentally, as you said, Sarah, there's no, I don't feel like there's a new strategy in that sense. People will always have that desire to connect, and relational I think relational discipleship is the only real way to do discipleship. To be able to walk alongside people, you have to walk alongside them, which necessitates communication, being curious about what they're interested in, and all that kind of stuff. But what you've hinted at, Paris, there is so insightful, that there are so many different areas and ways we can do this. Because I think I shared back even in February on the webinar that there are tiers of involvement. For example, you might not feel competent enough, or that you understand so much enough to be able to navigate the whole playing field, but just investigating, being curious enough. That's one tier. Just what do you like? Why is it so interesting to you? It opens up conversations that you wouldn't have if you didn't get interested. I know, Sarah, you made reference to you and one of your children when you were talking about like just getting interested in what they're interested in the article, and how that opens up a whole world of knowledge that you might not otherwise have access to. But then there's another tier where you incorporate stuff. Okay, you incorporate stuff into your sessions that kind of brings stuff in from a media or online perspective. And then you can have perhaps the most extreme, and perhaps what most people fear, that I have to invent stuff. It's not everyone who's called to invent stuff at that level, but you can get involved at different spheres and levels. So I think that's helpful. But yeah, I mean, Paris, Sarah, do you have any closing remarks before Paris takes us to the final stage?
Yeah, I think just echoing what you've said there, that actually it could just be one small change that you make that just opens up a whole new space. I think it's adding weight to what's already happening. And I think for me, like the exciting thing as well about the research that we did was that actually children and young people reinforce the fact that they value the face-to-face. Like that's a significant space for them. And I think generally as the church, like we do that space well, which is great. So I think it's let's celebrate in what we do and what's already happening. But then it's thinking, well, actually, if they're also wanting engagement and interaction and something online as well, how could we do something small that maybe adds weight to then what's happening in the face-to-face? And it's not an either or. It's not, well, we either do it online or we do it face-to-face, but how could the two kind of work in synergy together? And again, those small steps, right? Of actually, is it a case of you send every week, you might meet face-to-face, but then there's a video that gets sent out and they watch it whenever they want in their own time, when works for them. But then you chat about it the week after, or, is there something that they can be engaging with, or somewhere you can be signposting them where they can engage themselves at their own pace and take responsibility for that kind of faith journey themselves. And again, when you're face to face, you can experientially unpack, what was that like? Like, what did you make of that? And I think it's understanding their needs and their wants, but also the little things can really just add those extra opportunities. And I think that's it. It's not about saying we have to start from scratch and reinvent everything, do it all differently, but let's celebrate where we are. Thank God that children and young people are really valuing those spaces, and that's great. And then looking at, well, what's the one small thing maybe that we could do to add weight, add extra opportunity for connection, for exploration, in potentially those new areas. And also, like, let's network, right? Like find other people in your area that are excited about this, like, or nationally, or connect with other movements like Urban Saints, like Scripture Union, like YFC, like, there's like Youthscape. There's so many amazing organizations out there. Like, how are we connecting in and kind of building community around some of this to learn and share as well? So I think, what's the one small thing to add weight, and how are we kind of building community and networking around this, so we don't all have to do it and figure it out on our own, right? We're in this together, and how can we share resources, ideas, all of that kind of stuff as well?
Absolutely, that was a great closing point. So that's something for you guys out there to think on. How can you add weight this week? How can you make little changes, little steps towards this call, this mission field? I think that's a really important question for us to think about as we go through the week. And speaking of networking, Sarah, where can people find you, contact you? Where can they read your research? Can you let us know?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to scriptureunion.org.uk and you can find our research there. We've got a research page. So we've got the Exploring Hybrid Mission Research, which is a lot of what I've spoken about today. we've got some other great pieces on there as well that will hopefully equip you. And we've also got a great resource hub. So there's loads of resources on there pertaining to loads of different stuff. But we also have resources to help equip you around exploring gaming with children and young people. What kind of 10 ways that you could do that. We've got some resources on there around safeguarding as well. So actually practically, how do we even step foot in some of these spaces? What does that look like? What do we need to think about? Where can we go to get information for that? So there's stuff on there as well. And yeah, feel free to you can get in touch with me. My email address is sarahd@scriptsunion.org.uk. So if you want to chat more, got some ideas, know of people that are doing it really well, or just want to kind of chat more about how actually could you do this in your context as well. We've got our regional teams that are more than happy to kind of connect with you where you are and journey with you to figure out what some of this could look like in your context.
Okay, fantastic. So what we'll do, we'll put some links in our show notes and on our YouTube description that you can click and you can have a look and explore to your leisure. But Sarah, we just want to give you a big thank you for spending time with us and for sharing your knowledge and encouraging us on this episode. And we hope that you guys have enjoyed it. Please stay tuned, follow us on this journey, like, subscribe, turn on your notifications because you don't want to miss the next episode and other amazing guests that we're going to have joining us. So for now, guys, we're going to say goodbye and thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.